So us you're tired all the time after 60, the real causes doctors check first. What if the tiredness you've been blaming on just getting older actually has a specific cause, one that a doctor could identify in a single conversation and in many cases treat within weeks? Most people over 60 have been told the same thing when they mention fatigue to a friend, a family member, or even a doctor who's rushed for time. That's just aging, and sometimes that's partly true. Your body at 65 does not run exactly the way it did at 35, but in a huge number of cases, that explanation is doing something quietly harmful. It's letting a real, treatable, checkable cause go unaddressed for months, sometimes years, simply because everyone assumed there was nothing specific to look for. I'm not going to hand you a miracle fix. I'm not going to tell you there's one supplement, one drink, or one trick that switches your energy back on overnight. What I'm going to hand you is the real list, the specific, well-documented causes that doctors actually check for first when an older adult comes in describing fatigue. Then I'll walk you through exactly what each one looks like, how it's typically found, and what daily habits actually move the needle based on real research, not guesswork. If you've been finding these videos useful, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I put these together every week, and I'd rather you have this information than not. Let's start with the pattern so many people describe. They used to have energy for a full day, errands in the morning, lunch with a friend, tending the garden in the afternoon, maybe babysitting grandkids in the evening without needing to sit down every 20 minutes. And now, somewhere in the last few years, that changed. By early afternoon, they're running on empty. A short walk that used to feel effortless now leaves them wanting a nap. They assume this is simply what happens after 60, the natural, unavoidable cost of getting older. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes it is partly that. But fatigue like this is also one of the single most common symptoms tied to a short, specific list of medical conditions, and nearly every one of them is manageable, sometimes dramatically so, once it's actually identified. Before we go further, quick question. Is your fatigue worse in the morning, right when you wake up, or does it build gradually as the day goes on? Drop your answer and your age in the comments. It genuinely helps me figure out what to cover in future videos, and I read everyone. I want to give this pattern a name because I think naming things helps us actually notice them instead of accepting them by default. I call it the age fatigue trap. It's the quiet assumption that because you're a certain age, tiredness requires no further explanation, that it's simply background noise you're supposed to live with now. That assumption is exactly what allows real, fixable problems to sit unaddressed for years. The moment you stop assuming and start actually checking, you open the door to feeling meaningfully better, sometimes faster than you'd expect. So here is the real list. These are the causes doctors typically rule in or out first, when persistent fatigue shows up after 60. Number 1, sleep apnea. This is, by a wide margin, one of the most underdiagnosed causes of daytime exhaustion in older adults, and it is shockingly common. Sleep apnea causes repeated, brief interruptions in breathing throughout the night, sometimes dozens or even over 100 times per night in more severe cases, and the person experiencing it almost never fully wakes up or remembers it happening. What that means in practice is that you can go to bed, sleep a full 8 hours by the clock, and still wake up feeling like you barely slept at all, because your body never got the deep, uninterrupted sleep it actually needed to repair and restore itself. Common signs include loud snoring, gasping or choking sounds during sleep, morning headaches, and a bed partner mentioning that your breathing seems to pause. If any of that sounds familiar, a sleep study, which can often be done at home now with a simple portable device, is how it gets diagnosed, and the treatment, most commonly a CPAP machine, can be genuinely transformative. People frequently describe feeling like a switch flipped once their apnea is properly managed. Number 2, thyroid changes. Your thyroid is a small gland in your neck that regulates your metabolism, and thyroid function can shift meaningfully as you age. An underactive thyroid, known as hypothyroidism, is one of the most classic and most missed causes of fatigue in older adults, because its symptoms, tiredness, weight gain, feeling cold all the time, dry skin, low mood, get written off individually as normal aging instead of being connected together as one underlying cause. The good news is that this is diagnosed with one of the simplest tests on this entire list, a basic blood test called a TSH panel, and it's often very effectively treated with a small daily medication once identified. Number 3, anemia. This means your red blood cell count is lower than it should be, and since red blood cells are what carry oxygen throughout your body, having fewer of them means your tissues, including your muscles and your brain, are quite literally running on less oxygen than they need. Fatigue is very often the first and most noticeable symptom, sometimes alongside shortness of breath on exertion, pale skin, or feeling unusually cold. Anemia is caught with a routine blood test, and it can have several different underlying causes, from low iron to vitamin B12 deficiency to chronic conditions, which is exactly why it's worth having identified specifically rather than assumed away. Number 4, medication side effects. This one gets missed constantly because people rarely think to connect a new symptom to a medication they've already been taking for months. But many extremely common medications list fatigue as a documented side effect, including several blood pressure medications, certain antihistamines, some antidepressants, and a number of other everyday prescriptions. If your tiredness started or noticeably worsened around the same time a medication was added or changed, that timing is a real clue, and it's absolutely worth bringing up directly with your doctor or pharmacist. Sometimes a simple adjustment in dose or timing makes a significant difference. Number 5, poor sleep quality, which is a separate issue from sleep quantity. Sleep architecture genuinely changes as we age. Even in people without any diagnosed sleep disorder, older adults naturally experience more nighttime awakenings and less time spent in deep, restorative sleep compared to when they were younger. What this means practically is that two people can both sleep a full 7 hours and come away with very different quality of rest, because the depth and continuity of that sleep matters just as much as the total hours logged. Number 6, depression. This is probably the most surprising entry on this list for a lot of people, because depression in older adults frequently doesn't look like sadness at all. It often shows up as almost entirely physical. Low energy, reduced motivation, disrupted sleep, and a general sense of running on empty, which means it gets misread as purely physical fatigue and missed as a mental health symptom, especially by people who assume depression always comes with visible emotional distress. I want to be clear about something. None of these 6 causes require guesswork on your part. Every single one of them is something a doctor can check for directly, usually with a conversation and a basic set of blood tests, sometimes with a sleep study. You don't need to diagnose yourself watching a video. You need to know what questions to bring into the room. So here's what I'd actually suggest as a 2-part approach. Part 1 is a simple self-checklist to bring to your next appointment, because doctors can only work with the information you give them, and a rushed 15-minute visit doesn't always leave room to dig deep unless you come prepared. Before your next appointment, write down when your fatigue tends to be worst: morning, afternoon, or steady all day. Note whether anyone has ever mentioned that you snore loudly or seem to gasp during sleep. List any medications that started or changed around the same time your fatigue began. Check whether you've had a thyroid panel or an iron and B12 check within the last year, and if not, ask for one. And take note of whether your mood has shifted alongside your energy, even subtly. Walking in with that list dramatically speeds up getting an actual specific answer, instead of leaving with the same "let's see how it goes" that so many people get when fatigue is mentioned only in passing. Part 2 is 2 everyday habits that have real, consistent evidence behind them for supporting energy levels, not as a replacement for medical evaluation, but as something worth doing regardless of what that evaluation finds. The first is morning light exposure. Getting outside, or at minimum sitting near a bright window, within the first hour of waking helps anchor your circadian rhythm, the internal clock that regulates both how alert you feel during the day and how well you fall and stay asleep at night. Even 10 to 15 minutes of natural morning light exposure has a measurable effect on this rhythm, and it's one of the simplest, lowest-effort habits with genuine research behind it. The second is a consistent wake time, every single day, including weekends. It's tempting to think that sleeping in on a weekend catches you up, but sleep researchers consistently find that a fixed, stable wake time does more for steady daytime energy than chasing extra hours at inconsistent times. Your body responds to rhythm and regularity far more than it responds to raw hours of sleep alone. I want to be honest with you. Neither of these habits is a miracle fix, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. They're small, genuinely well-supported habits that work alongside whatever your doctor visit uncovers, not a substitute for it. One more thing before we close. If your fatigue is severe, came on suddenly rather than gradually, or is accompanied by other symptoms, chest pain, shortness of breath at rest, confusion, unexplained weight loss or swelling in your legs, that is not a wait-and-see situation. Please contact your doctor promptly rather than trying to work through it with home remedies first. Sudden or severe fatigue paired with any of those symptoms deserves prompt medical attention, full stop. Here's why I think this actually matters beyond just feeling less tired. Energy isn't just about getting through a to-do list. It's what lets you actually be present for the things that matter. A full afternoon with your grandkids instead of needing to sit out halfway through. A garden you can tend without dreading it. A trip you've been putting off because you weren't sure you'd have the stamina for it. Chasing down the real, specific cause of your fatigue instead of quietly accepting it as an unavoidable cost of getting older is genuinely one of the most practical, high-impact things you can do for your quality of life this year. If this helped you, or if it gave you something to bring to your next doctor's appointment, consider subscribing. I put together one real research-backed senior health topic like this every single week, and I'd rather hand you something useful than something flashy. And I'd genuinely like to know, is your fatigue worse in the morning, or does it build through the afternoon? Tell me in the comments. Along with your age. It helps me know exactly what to cover next. Thanks so much for watching.